Alright folks, strap in for a tale that's less knights in shining armor and more knights in sweaty armpits. This ain't your bard's bedtime story spun with glitter and unicorns by some lute-strumming wannabe who's never smelled a battlefield or a medieval latrine. Nope. Tonight we're wading knee-deep into the gloriously gross reality of a knight's life where the air reeks of damp wool, horse farts, and broken dreams. Meet Aldrich de Ravenshollow, who's not, sir, anything yet just a 7-year-old with a crusty nose and zero clue that knighthood's less about glory and more about not dying from a bad stew. If this muck-soaked chuckle-fest of a story lulls you to sleep, and honestly, if medieval history doesn't knock you out, you're probably chugging mead, hit that like button and subscribe, but only if it genuinely soothes your soul. I don't want your half-hearted clicks. Life's too short, and medieval life was basically a sprint to the grave. Toss a comment with where you're at and what time it is. There's something downright magical about knowing someone in Dubai is dozing off to the same saga of nightly nonsense as someone in Dublin. It's like we're all stuck in the same muddy century just vibing, so kick back, get comfy way comfier than Aldrich's hay-stuffed mattress which doubled as a flea convention. Ditch the fairy tale fluff, no dragons, no princesses with Instagram-ready braids. Instead, you've got a lord who'll yeet you into next week if you forget to scrub his boots armor that pinches your unmentionables like a jealous crab, and a horse whose cough sounds like it's gargling gravel. Heroism. Puffed. Heroism is making it to Friday without your guts staging a revolt. Let's get one thing straight. We're not talking about those round table posers with their pristine capes and quests that somehow never involved stepping in cow dung. Those knights were dreamt up by quill jockeys who'd faint at the sight of a real lance. We're in 13th century England where the Plantagenet kings ran their empire like a reality show gone wrong, squabbling over castles and yeeting armies at France. Because why not Edward Longshanks a king? So tall, he clotheslined himself on door frames, treated war like a weekend hobby, while Northumbria Aldrich's gloomy home was a soggy Scottish border-adjacent dump where the sun was on permanent vacation. Aldrich's dad, a small-time landowner, brags about his mill that only floods twice a year, basically Northumbria's version of a Tesla. But little Aldrich's about to learn that knighthood's no jousting jamboree. It's a soul-crushing slog like signing up for a Viking raid, but all you get is dish duty. Knighthood was the medieval MLM the king dangles land and fancy titles, but you're stuck polishing armor and praying your horse doesn't sneeze you into a ditch. The big shots kings dukes rake in the glory. The rest. Well, Aldrich's about to find out that epic quests mostly involve shoveling manure and hoping your lord doesn't notice you nicked his ale. But before Aldrich can even dream of a shiny helmet, he's got to survive being a kid in a world where childhood was just don't die the game. Medieval England wasn't exactly Chuck E. Cheese. Kids croaked from stuff like bad vibes, cursed well water, or gods having a bad day. Doctors were basically stab-happy alchemists slinging leeches and weeds that might either cure you or make you see demons. If you hit 7 without yeeting yourself into a moat or catching the medieval yuck, you were deemed sturdy enough to start night training, aka fetching ale, and dodging slaps from grumpy squires. So dim, the lights maybe light a candle if you're feeling extra. Just know medieval candles were made of pig fat and smelled like a BBQ disaster. Snuggle up and let's trail Aldrich as he stumbles toward knighthood one bruised blister. And why did I sign up for this at a time? This is history. Hilarious, horrifying, and honest as a peasant's tax bill. Picture medieval society as the world's oldest pyramid scheme where everyone's groveling to someone above them. Peasants kiss up to landlords, landlords bow to barons, barons kowtow to earls. Earls fawn over the king and the king. He's supposedly serving God, but it's more like a high-stakes game of you watch my back. I'll try not to shank yours. One wrong move, and you're out probably with a sword in your gut. Enter young Aldrich, 7 years old, standing in the great hall of his dad's estate, if you can call it that. its less grand palace and more multi-purpose barn where they eat judge and stash the cows when Yorkshire's endless drizzle turns into a monsoon, his dad. Sir Geoffrey de Wintermere is a minor knight, which is historian speak for owns just enough land to afford armor, but it's the discount stuff that rusts if you sneeze. Geoffrey's spent his life swinging swords for lords with beefs, earning a wife a soggy estate, and a cough that screams, "My chainmail was not OSHA compliant." Now, at the ripe old age of 35, basically medieval Methuselah, he's got to secure his kid's future. The plan yeet Aldrich into the service of a lord who's got cash clout, and hopefully the patience not to wallop him for spilling the mead. After some haggling, and probably a few shiny coins, it's settled Aldrich's off to Ravenshollow Castle home of Lord Godwin de Ravenshollow. This guy's the medieval equivalent of a CEO who's fair, but will fire you for using Comic Sans. Obedience isn't optional, it's the whole job description. The big departure day arrives, and Yorkshire's serving its signature gray soggy misery. The goodbye is less Hallmark movie, and more, here's your stuff, don't die. Sir Geoffrey slaps a hand on Aldrich's shoulder, checks his tiny sack of belongings. Think medieval carry-on luggage and drops some classic dad wisdom. Keep your yap shut your ears, perked and your hands moving. Don't make the family name a punchline more than it already is. Lady Margaret Aldrich's mom hands him a wooden cross and tells him to pray. She doesn't cry. Medieval moms didn't have time for that nonsense. There were pigs to feed and socks to darn. But her eyes might have been a tad shiny just saying. And so Aldrich hops onto a creaky cart driven by a guy who looks like he was chiseled from a grumpy boulder. The driver grunts at the horses and off they go, bouncing down a road that's basically a mud pit with ambitions. As the cart rattles toward Ravenshollow, Aldrich's got time to daydream. He's heard all the stories, castles, knight's glory, but he's just old enough to suspect the real deal might be less epic quest and more epic mess. Spoiler, he's not wrong. Reality's about to hit like a jousting lance to the face, muddy chilly, and way more complicated than any bard's ballad. Because here's the thing, knighthood doesn't start with trumpets or prophecies. It starts with a kid in a turnip-scented cart clutching a sack smaller than a modern fanny pack, headed to a future he can't even spell. This is no hero's journey, it's a practical deal between practical people in a world where practical means nobody's stabbed anybody yet. It's a bumpy ride, a curt farewell, and the first lesson in a truth Aldrich will learn the hard way. Heroism sneaks in quietly wearing soggy boots and asking more questions than it answers. The cart trundles through the English countryside past peasants toiling in fields that'll never make them Instagram famous, past villages where smoke from cooking fires mingles with the eternal gray, past churches where priests mumble prayers for souls that might be too busy dodging dysentery to listen. Up ahead, Ravenshollow Castle looms like a grumpy stone molar jutting from the hills. Soon, Aldrich will learn what service really means, the weight of duty, the cost of dreaming big, and the weird fact that glory's mostly just surviving a string of mundane days with ninja-level patience. But for now, he's just a kid watching his old life vanish behind him, while the unknown looms ahead like a bad Tinder date. The horses slog on their breath, puffing in the chilly air, their hooves thumping like a slow, stubborn pulse. And maybe that's the real secret of knighthood. Not the shiny tournaments or epic battles, but the dogged day-by-day grind of moving forward one muddy step at a time toward whatever's waiting around the next bend. Probably more mud, but you get the idea. The cart screeched to a stop before Ravenshollow Castle's gates, just as Yorkshire's sky settled into its usual maigre, like the heavens were too lazy to pick a mood. The driver, who'd spent the whole trip muttering sweet nothings to his horses, turned to Aldrich with a face that screamed, "This is where I ditch you, kid. Off you go, lad." He grunted, pointing at the castle. "Try not to croak on day one. Makes me look bad." Ravenshollow Castle squatted in the hills like God's grumpiest Lego project built with all the cheer of a tax audit. It wasn't England's biggest fortress, Windsor, and the Tower of London had that flex, but it was scary enough to make you question every choice that led you to its gates. The gray stone walls, battered by endless northern winters, screamed, "Turn back while you still can." The main keep loomed like a giant middle finger to the sky, surrounded by smaller buildings, clinging to it, like nervous groupies at a warlord's concert. The gatehouse was a medieval panic room on steroids, designed to make you feel like an ant about to be squashed. Murder holes in the ceiling promised a hot oil facial for uninvited guests, while arrow slits glared like the eyes of a bouncer who's already decided you're not on the list. 7-year-old Aldrich stood there clutching his tiny sack of stuff, 2 tunics, his mom-stitched wool hose doomed to disintegrate, a half-broken comb, a wooden cross, and his granddad's old eating knife. It was less luggage and more proof he existed. Pages didn't need much. Their job was to show up, shut up, and work, not to roll in with a medieval U-Haul. The gates groaned open like they were auditioning for a horror flick manned by guards who'd mastered the art of looking bored and murderous at the same time. They sized Aldrich up like he was a questionable eBay purchase. Another page. One side, sounding like he'd seen 100 hopeful kids come and go, each leaving with fewer dreams and more scars. Might make it through winter, the other shrugged, which was basically a Michelin star in guard speak. Aldrich was herded across the outer bailey past stables, where horses snorted like they were judging his life choices, past the armory, where the clang of hammers hinted at weapons being born or fixed, past kitchens pumping out smoke, and the mouth-watering smell of roasting meat that reminded Aldrich's stomach it hadn't seen food since dawn. The inner bailey was the castle's VIP zone, the great hall for feasting the solar, where the lord's family pretended to be comfy, the chapel for praying away your sins, and a maze of buildings housing the army of folks who kept this medieval machine humming. And what an army castles weren't self-cleaning, no matter what bards blabbed. You needed cooks, stable boys, blacksmiths, archers, priests, clerks, laundresses, carpenters. The list went on like a medieval LinkedIn. At the bottom of this food chain were the pages kids like Aldrich sent to learn service, aka how to not get fired by a lord. They weren't quite servants, their family name saved them from scrubbing chamber pots, but they sure weren't sipping mead with the nobles. Pages were the interns of the Middle Ages, expected to hustle hard while keeping their pride intact. A tightrope act Aldrich would wobble on for the next 7 years. He was handed off to Marcus the steward, a guy whose vibe was, I fix everyone's messes, and take the blame when they flop. Marcus wasn't mean or nice, he was practical, which in medieval times was worth more than a chest of gold. He eyed Aldrich like he was inspecting a slightly dodgy horse. "So you're Geoffrey's kid," he said, squinting. "Knew your dad when he was your size. Always daydreaming and falling off horses like it was his job. Let's hope you got your mom's brains and not his 2 left hooves." This was Aldrich's welcome to castle life, no warm fuzzies, no orientation packet. Medieval kids were thrown into the deep end, expected to learn by watching doing and not screwing up too badly. It was education by trial and error, except the errors might earn you a whack and the water was freezing. Sink or swim, kid. And good luck. Aldrich's new digs were a dormitory that made a broom closet look like a penthouse. Picture 4 straw pallets, basically medieval torture mattresses, a shared chest that smelled like despair, a window that leaked more cold air than light, and a stench that was 1 part sweaty boys, 1 part soggy straw, and 1 part surprise gift from the castle rats. Home sweet home, right? His roommates were a motley crew. Thomas, a sunny kid from Lincolnshire, could read a horse's mood like it was tweeting its feelings. Will a grim-faced boy from the Welsh marches was sent north to dodge the border wars that made his hometown a medieval Hunger Games. Edmund, a Norfolk lord's son who'd been at Ravenshollow 6 months, was the group's Yoda dispensing hard-earned wisdom from surviving his rookie mistakes. That first night as the castle creaked like a haunted house, Edmund laid down, The law rule, one never volunteer. They'll bury you in chores without your help. Will chimed in, Rule 2, always know the nearest privy. Your bowels will thank you. Thomas grinned. Rule 3, if cook offers you a treat, run. It's either spoiled or she's after your soul. These weren't in any knightly handbook, but they were gold tips that separated pages who thrived from those who limped home crying. Castle life was a maze of unwritten rules, favors, and grudges, like a medieval soap opera with worse hygiene. The day kicked off pre-dawn with the chapel bell dragging everyone to prayers. It wasn't about saving your soul, it was about keeping the castle's vibe God-approved. Father Benedict, the twig-thin chaplain, led prayers with the speed of a barista on a Monday rush still clinging to faith, despite a flock obsessed with smiting enemies and dodging their own graves. Breakfast in the great hall was bread ale, and whatever the kitchen hadn't accidentally poisoned. Pages scarfed at the kiddie tables, keeping their heads down while the bigwigs plotted the day's chaos. Then the real grind began. Pages were the castle's Swiss army knives, messengers, kitchen grunts, stable hands armor, polishers, you name it. Glamorous? Nope. Running messages meant climbing stairs until your legs screamed, only to find Sir So-and-so was napping elsewhere. Kitchen duty was wrestling pots heavier than a cow dodging fire, and learning which herbs spice stew versus which ones sent you to the privy for a week. No FDA back then, folks. Polishing weapons and armor was educational if your idea of learning is soul-crushing boredom. Swords had to gleam, mail couldn't rust leather-needed oil, and everything had to be perfect or you'd catch a knight's wrath, think Gordon Ramsay, but with a sword. Aldrich learned to spot nicks, fix dents, and never let a knight find a speck of rust unless he wanted a lecture he'd feel in his bones. Horses were the worst. Medieval war horses weren't cuddly ponies, they were jacked-up beasts bred to yeet knights into battle. They bit, kicked, and crushed toes like they were auditioning for a villain role. Pages had to fake confidence, move fast, and pray the horse didn't smell their fear. Too shy, you're limping. Too cocky. Say hello to a hoof-shaped bruise. Navigating the castle's social jungle was trickier than dodging hooves. Everyone had a rank, and you'd better know yours. Mouth off to a knight. Enjoy scrubbing latrines, chummy with servants, good luck getting help. Mix up the steward's authority with the marshal's. Congrats, you're stuck pleasing two bosses who hate each other. Knights like Sir Gareth the Bold, or Sir Roderick of Westminster, were like rock stars, distant, dazzling, and demanding. Pages worshipped them, but lived in a different universe, scrubbing floors while knights waxed poetic about honor. Aldrich learned fast that knightly ideals were like Instagram filters, shiny but fake. Songs sang of epic quests. Reality was laundry and horse bites. Knights chased glory, pages chased clean socks. Winter made it worse. The castle's stone walls trapped cold like a fridge, and the pages' dorm was a freezer with bad Wi-Fi. They slept in their clothes, huddled like penguins, and prayed their toes didn't turn into chilblains, medieval frostbite's annoying cousin. Washing water, froze hands went numb, and the only way to stay warm was to keep moving. But winter forged friendships. Pages who survived Yorkshire's icy hell became brothers. They shared scraps, watched each other's backs, and found laughs in the misery. Edmund was a comedy genius, mimicking knights' pompous struts just shy of getting flogged. Thomas the Horse Whisperer could predict storms and soothe stomach aches with sketchy herbs. Will was the quiet MVP, sharpening swords to razor perfection, and writing letters so neat even monks were jealous. Together, they were a scrappy squad covering for each other's flubs and mastering the castle's chaos. Over the years, Aldrich grew, not into a knight that was a pipe dream for now, but into someone who got it. Honor wasn't a speech. It was showing up day after day. Strength was gritting your teeth through another freezing morning. Courage was doing your job when you'd rather hide under a blanket. The gap between legend and reality wasn't a bug, it was the point. Stories gave you something to aim for, but the real work was in the grind. Small choices, quiet wins, the slow climb from kid to almost adult. By 14, Aldrich was tall enough to stare down a man strong enough to wrangle a warhorse mostly, and wise enough to know his education was just warming up. Page life was done. Squire life loomed with new headaches and lessons about what knighthood really meant. For now, he'd survived Ravenshollow's boot camp, learned to serve without losing his spine, and started to grasp the messy dance between duty and dreams that would shape his life. On a chilly spring morning with Yorkshire's hills teasing the idea that winter might eventually chill out, 14-year-old Aldrich stood in Ravenshollow Castle's great hall, sweating bullets about his future. Going from page to squire wasn't a free upgrade. You needed a knight to vouch for you, and knights weren't exactly lining up to adopt teenage interns. They were picky like chefs rejecting subpar tomatoes. Enter Sir Gareth the Bold, whose nickname was a medieval PR fluke. Ages ago, he'd charged some Scottish raiders thinking they were a bigger deal than they were, only to find their camp half empty. Everyone called it bravery instead of needs glasses, and the Bold label stuck like gum on a shoe. In his 30s, basically a dinosaur for a knight. Gareth was a walking scar museum with a chill vibe about war. His armor was a dented mess from real fights, not parades, and his sword looked like it had seen more action than a tavern brawl. So Gareth said, eyeing Aldrich like he was a used horse, "Marcus says, you're the least useless page this year. You've dodged horse hooves, kitchen poison, and page-on-page violence, which means you're either freakishly good or the luckiest kid in Yorkshire." "I try to stay sharp," my Lord Aldrich replied, picking his words like he was defusing a bomb. 7 years as a page had taught him to watch, listen, and not blurt dumb stuff. Smart. A squire who zones out gets knights killed, and dead knights are terrible for your LinkedIn. Gareth's dry wit was peak knight humor gallows with a side of blood. And just like that, Aldrich leveled up to squire trading his help, every one page gig, for a one-night fan club. Suddenly keeping Sir Gareth alive, shiny and happy was his whole deal. Gareth was the knight equivalent of a no-nonsense contractor. He'd fought in Edward Longshanks's Welsh campaigns, jousted in tournaments without making a fool of himself, and ran his small estate like a budget-conscious accountant. War wasn't a fairy tale to him, it was a job, and Aldrich was now his apprentice in the fine art of not dying. Squire life was page life on steroids. Pages scrubbed floors for the castle. Squires were Gareth's personal pit crew. Aldrich had to know Gareth's swords every day, versus tournament flex spot, when his boss was sliding into a grumpy funk, and predict needs like a psychic butler. Armor care was basically a PhD program. Gareth's male hauberk, a zillion hand-riveted rings, was a diva that demanded constant pampering. Aldrich inspected every link for rust or wear, replaced busted rings like a jeweler, then scrubbed the whole thing with sand and vinegar until it gleamed. One weak link in battle, goodbye, Gareth. The plate armor was next-level neurosurgery. Breastplate, arm guards, leg bits all had to fit Gareth like a bespoke suit, adjusted for his post-tournament beer belly or whatever. Buckles had to lock, tight hinges had to glide, or Aldrich's sloppiness could get Gareth yeeted into the afterlife. Weapons were just as fussy. Gareth's sword, forged by England's Gordon Ramsay of smiths, needed to slice silk, but not chip on armor. Aldrich checked the crossguard and pommel for wobbles that could turn a duel into a disaster. Lances were swapped out like cheap pens, but each had to be tested for balance and not being a total dud. The mace and warhammer were low maintenance, but still needed regular as this crack checkups. Horses were Aldrich's nightmare. Gareth had 3 Thunder the Destrier, a roided-up warbeast, a courser for casual rides, and a palfrey for chill road trips. Thunder, because knights loved cheesy names, was a tank with a PhD in attitude. Saddling him without getting chomped or kicked was like wrestling a grumpy dinosaur. Aldrich had to project I'm the boss vibes, while secretly praying Thunder wouldn't call his bluff. Combat training went from swing stick look cool to don't die idiot. Under Willem the Castle's master-at-arms, a two-fingered grump who'd survived a Scottish claymore. The drills were brutal. Fighting's not about guts, Willem growled. Guts get you killed faster. It's about skill practice and not being where the sword lands. Aldrich drilled footwork until his legs moved on autopilot practice sword moves, until his arms forgot how to think and slogged around in heavy armor until he could moonwalk in steel. Tournaments were the medieval Super Bowl, with cash clout and serious bragging rights. Gareth hit the circuit to stay sharp and pay the bills, dragging Aldrich along for real-world crash courses in knot-sucking. These events were half sport, half soap opera, where knights flexed nobles, gossiped, and squires, like Aldrich, prayed they'd packed the right lance. At tournaments, Aldrich was a one-man pit crew game analyst, and ER nurse rolled into one. He made sure Sir Gareth's gear was pristine and snug scoped out opponents' fighting quirks like a medieval sports commentator, and stood ready to patch up his boss if a joust went south. Tournaments were like the Super Bowl meets Cage, fighting flashy violent and with a crowd hyped for blood. The joust was the main event, knights in full armor barreling at each other on horses' lances, splintering like cheap IKEA furniture, praying the shards didn't take an eye out. Falls were gnarly one bad tumble, and you're a medieval pancake. Sir Gareth was solid, but not a tournament rock star. He won enough to cover his bar tab, stayed respectable, without painting a target on his back for glory-hungry hotshots. Melee fights were a different beast, think Black Friday at Walmart, but with swords. Dozens of knights brawled in semi-organized chaos, mimicking real war. Winning meant sinking with your squad, spotting openings, and not getting clobbered, while the rules took a coffee break. Aldrich learned to read the melee's flow like a hawk ready to swoop in with a spare lance or drag Gareth out before he became a speed bump. He also picked up battlefield first aid, staunching blood-splinting bones and guessing if a KO'd knight was napping or needed a priest ASAP. Then came the Welsh campaigns, courtesy of Edward Longshanks's Let's Squash Wales tour. Gareth's feudal lease came with a show up or lose your land clause, so off they went. Aldrich's first taste of real war was less epic clash and more miserable road trip. The army slogged through mud rain and logistics that'd make a FedEx driver cry. The Welsh fighting for their home turf were ninja-level, annoying, popping up for ambushes, then vanishing like medieval Houdinis. Every hill screamed trap, every valley whispered you're screwed. Aldrich's to-do list ballooned scrounging food, shuttling messages, sleeping in armor like a tin can burrito. He learned to find drinkable water till normal army noise, from oh crap ambush, and keep his cool when arrows started flying. The siege of Caerphilly Castle was War Engineering 101. Sieges were less about heroics and more about building giant catapults and waiting. Aldrich watched siege engines rise, supply lines form, and diplomats haggle like it was a medieval eBay auction. When fighting finally kicked off, it was quick, brutal, and kinda meh. The Welsh surrendered when their odds hit zero. Aldrich ended up playing accountant, tallying captured swords and armor like a grumpy clerk. Back at Ravenshollow, Aldrich wasn't the shaky Squire from 3 years ago. A pinch of combat experience made him a mini-legend in a world obsessed with war stories. He'd seen men crack-tested his own guts and mastered the art of not dying in a ditch. Gareth started looping him into strategy talks, not just to be nice squires, saw the nitty-gritty knights missed and smart bosses milked that intel. Their vibe shifted from boss and minion to work bros. Aldrich wasn't just fetching Gareth's coffee anymore, he was thinking like a knight weighing big-picture choices instead of blindly following orders. By 20, he was a pro wrangling war horses, keeping gear battle ready, and swinging swords, lances, and maces like he meant it. More than that, he could strategize, lead under fire, and juggle honor survival, and don't piss off the king. Knighthood's fancy ceremony was still pending, but Aldrich was already the real deal, just waiting for the official Sir Sticker. The kid who'd rolled into Ravenshollow with a tiny sack of stuff was now a guy who could run a battlefield, rally troops, and handle his lord's business like a medieval middle manager. The next chapter would throw new curveballs, but years of grinding had built a foundation tougher than castle walls. Soon, he'd kneel, feel a sword tap, and rise as Sir Aldrich de Ravenshollow, ready for the glory, the grief, and the endless paperwork that came with the gig. On a gloomy October morning, with Yorkshire's moors rocking a bronze-leaf aesthetic and the air hinting at winter's incoming punch, Lord Godwin got a royal text well parchment from King Edward's court. Time to haul his noble butt to Westminster knights and squires in tow. The kicker. A juicy tidbit that squires like Aldrich, old enough and battle-tested, might snag knighthood at the Michaelmas bash. Sir Gareth dropped the news with the chill vibe of a dad pretending it's no big deal. "Oh, look," he said, "fake reading a Scroll King needs us at court. Some fancy ceremony for promising young men. Wonder who that could be." The 2-week trek to Westminster was a medieval road trip from hell, slogging south at a pace that made snails look speedy. Lord Godwin's posse, 3 knights, including Gareth, their squires, and a gaggle of grunts and servants rolled deep, because nobles didn't do carry-on only. Status demanded swagger, and practicality demanded enough gear to survive bandits' breakdowns or a surprise swamp. Aldrich was a mess of hype and whatever. Knighthood was the finish line after 14 years of grinding, but he knew the sword tap wouldn't magically make him taller or wiser. He'd kneel a squire, rise a knight, and still be the same guy who'd been dodging horse kicks since age 7. England's scenery morphed as they went from Yorkshire's moody hills to the Midlands' chill farmlands, past villages harvesting crops and fields, sporting post-harvest stubble like a bad haircut. Closer to London, the roads leveled up from muddy ruts to legit Roman-style highways, still holding up despite medieval maintenance, aka ignoring potholes. Westminster was a jaw-dropper for Aldrich, who'd only heard of royal power in stories. The palace sprawled along the Thames like a medieval DC, packed with the king's crib offices and enough bureaucrats to run an empire from Scotland to Spain. Westminster's Great Hall was a flex of royal ego ceiling, so high it flirted with the clouds columns, that made you feel like an ant tapestries hyping up dead kings and stained glass windows, splashing colors on floors polished by centuries of fancy boots. King Edward Longshanks himself was a human skyscraper, nearly 6.5 feet tall, when most dudes were hobbit-sized. His vibe screamed, "I've crushed nations, and I'm not impressed with you earned from years of yeeting Wales, Scotland, and anyone else who looked at him funny." They called him the Hammer of the Celts, and he looked ready to hammer anyone who forgot his coffee order. The knighthood ceremony was set for St. Michael's Feast, a warrior saint vibe perfect for minting new knights, plus a handy gap in the farming and fighting schedule. The night before, Aldrich pulled the classic vigil in St. Stephen's Chapel, a cozy stone box built for squires to pray and not pass out. It was a spiritual gut check, and a stamina test kneeling all night showed you could handle knighthood's grind. The chapel was a freezer, its stone walls sucking up heat like a black hole. One wobbly candle threw shadows of saints and angels, while Aldrich's knees screamed on floors worn smooth by countless wannabe knights. He prayed the old-school litany St. George Dragonslayer, St. Martin cloak-sharing soldier-turned-bishop heroes who knew swinging a sword came with a moral to-do list protect the weak. Don't be a jerk. Between prayers, Aldrich's brain wandered. The scrawny kid who'd rolled into Ravenshollow was a ghost, now replaced by a guy shaped by years of chores combat and Gareth's deadpan life lessons. He thought of Willem's brutal drills, his Squire bras camaraderie, and those Welsh battles where don't die became his mantra. Knighthood meant Powerland Arms Command, but also a laundry list of duties: serve your lord's shield, the helpless stick to gods and the king's rules, even when it sucked. Dawn bells yanked him back to reality, kicking off the big day. The ceremony was hours away, but the morning was a whirlwind of prep. First up, the ceremonial bath, a holy dunk to rinse off sins and prep for knightly life. The water was warm, spiked with herbs that supposedly blessed your soul and smelt better than the castle latrine. Bathing was a big deal. Medieval folks didn't shower daily. This was more like a spiritual spa day. Then came the outfit, a white tunic, for I'm pure brown hose, for I'm humble, and a red robe screaming, I'll bleed for the church and kids. Dressing was like cosplaying a knight's vibe, every thread loaded with meaning. The Great Hall was pimped out for the occasion, extra banners, with royal and noble logos, pop-up bleachers. For the VIPs, knights bureaucrats, bishops, and proud parents. Aldrich marched in with other Squire bros, all trying to look cool while internally freaking out. The procession had big graduation day energy with priests leading and sponsor knights trailing like proud coaches. The ceremony was old school, mixing OG cavalry traditions with Christian flair. King Edward himself would do the honors, a flex that tied knighthood to the crown and made everyone feel extra fancy. When Aldrich's name boomed across Westminster's Great Hall, he swaggered up and dropped to one knee before King Edward, who was brandishing a sword so blinged out it could have starred in a rap video. This blade was no thrift store find polished to a mirror sheen, with a hilt dripping in gold and gems that sparkled like they were winking at the crowd. Aldrich de Ravenshollow, Edward's voice thundered. You've mopped floors, saddled horses, and dodged death as a page and squire. Swear before God and these fancy-pants nobles to be a solid knight back the church. Kiss up to me and stick up for the little guy. Yeah, I swear. Your Majesty, Aldrich said, cool as a cucumber, despite his heart doing a jousting match in his chest. The sword grazed his right shoulder, then his left light as a feather, but heavy. With you're a big deal. Now vibes. Be thou a good knight, Edward declared. And poof, Aldrich was. Sir Aldrich de Ravenshollow, no longer Gareth's gopher, but a legit knight who could swing steel-owned land and tell people what to do. The crowd clapped like they were at a posh tea party, not a rave, but it was real props for a guy who'd clawed his way up over years of grunt work. The feast that followed was a royal flex, peacocks roasted and refeathered like they were ready for vogue pastries, shaped like castles and galleons, and Gascony wines so smooth you forgot you were in a hall that smelled like damp stone. Aldrich's new seat was a glow-up, not rubbing elbows with the top dogs, but way better than the Squire nosebleed section. The night's entertainment screamed knight's rule. Minstrels cranked out bangers about heroic deeds, and storytellers spun yarns about OG knights who were basically superheroes with morals. The vibe knighthood's about duty, not flexing for clout. The real moment hit when Sir Gareth strolled over with wine and a grin that said, I'm proud, but also thrilled you're not my problem anymore. So, Sir Aldrich, he teased, how's it feel to own your own disasters? Like I need a stiff drink, Aldrich admitted. I didn't realize how cushy it was letting you take the heat. Gareth smirked. That's how you know you're ready. Knights who crave power are the ones who'll yeet themselves into a ditch. They chewed over the nitty-gritty. Aldrich needed his own crew, a budget tighter than a miser's purse, and the guts to make calls that could screw him or his people. Going from yes boss to I'm the boss was like swapping training wheels for a unicycle. The king had hooked him up with a starter estate in Yorkshire near Ravenshollow, with a manor house, some farms, and a lordly to-do list. It wasn't a castle, but it'd keep him fed and armed when Edward yelled go time. Next morning, Aldrich faced his first nightly hurdle planning his Westminster exit. No more leaning on Gareth. He had to sort transport, pick a route, and pray he didn't end up in a bog. Same old Squire tasks, but now if it went sideways, he'd be the one eating crow. The slog back to Yorkshire was a multi-level quest with pit stops at manors and monasteries. These weren't just for naps and snacks, they were for networking like medieval LinkedIn meetups. Aldrich needed allies to thrive as a solo knight. At every stop, folks treated him like Sir Aldrich, not Gareth's shadow. Servants who'd once ghosted him now hovered like groupies. Minor nobles who'd snubbed him now yapped about crop yields. It was weird, like getting VIP status, but still figuring out the ropes. By the time he hit his new estate, Aldrich got it. Knighthood wasn't just a shiny badge, it was a whole vibe shaping his crew, his choices, and his spot in the feudal food chain. The Westminster bash was dope, but the real knightly grind was just warming up. The epic saga of knighthood was kicking off, packed with headaches, wins, and responsibilities that'd make a squire cry. Behind him was the cozy world of following orders. Ahead was the wild unknown of calling the shots. It was the kind of leap that weeded out the true knights from the posers who just liked shiny armor. Sir Aldrich had just 3 months to savor his shiny new Lord of the Manor gig before King Edward's royal buzzkill arrived. The king was over Wales's Hole where independent shtick and was rallying England's war machine for what chroniclers hyped as the final Welsh smackdown, though anyone with a history book knows. Final in Wales means see you in a few years. A muddy, panting messenger delivered the summons, looking like he'd wrestled a swamp to get there. Aldrich was ordered to Chester Stat with gear supplies and a posse for a campaign against Llywelyn ap Gruffudd, the Welsh prince, who'd mistaken Edward's threats for medieval trash talk. Turning Aldrich's cozy estate into a war-ready unit was like prepping for Coachella with a medieval budget. He needed extra swords armor for his crew pack mules and a zillion random items, horseshoes, pots, spare bowstrings, and sketchy medical supplies to keep his guys from croaking in a Welsh ditch. War wasn't cheap, and Aldrich's bank account was more peasant than prince. To avoid showing up with a rusty sword and vibes, he mortgaged part of his land to York's Jewish moneylenders. A savvy move that had haunted his ledger for years, but kept him campaign ready. His squad was 6 men-at-arms grizzled pros who'd signed on for cash and the chance to swipe some Welsh loot. Led by Hugh de Bramber, a sergeant who'd survived 15 years under Gareth, they were the kind of vets who could teach a master class in not dying. The week-long march to Chester was a parade of war-prep knights with their crew's supply wagons, creaking cows mooing their way to the army's buffet, and camp followers, tagging along like medieval groupies. Chester was a war Walmart bursting with soldiers, merchants, and randos cashing in on the military boom. The castle was VIP central for big shots, while Aldrich and 2 other rookie knights bunked in a wool warehouse turned Airbnb. Cozy, nope. But cozy was about to be a distant memory. Edward's army was a beast the biggest since William the Conqueror's 1066 Rhaegar. It mixed feudal knights, hired pros, Welsh turncoats betting on Team England, and longbow-wielding infantry who were rewriting war's rulebook. Longbows were the medieval equivalent of a sniper rifle. In the right hands, they'd punch through mail like it was tissue paper, making knightly charges about as smart as running into a wood chipper. The Welsh had perfected this trick in their guerrilla games, but the English were catching on fast. Aldrich's first taste of real combat hit at the Conway River, where Welsh archers tried to hold a rocky hillside. It wasn't a battle so much as a 60-minute slaughter. English artillery giant crossbows on wheels blasted the Welsh defenses to bits, while archers and infantry steamrolled the survivors. Aldrich and his crew played cleanup chasing stragglers and nabbing prisoners worth a ransom. Heroic? Nah. More like armed janitor duty. Chasing Welsh fighters through their home turf was like playing tag in a booby-trapped maze. Narrow valleys and rocky hills turned Aldrich's cavalry from badass to sitting ducks for archers who knew every nook like it was their backyard. He learned to eyeball terrain like a survivalist, spotting where his horse might get him killed. His first real sword fight went down in a Snowdonia ambush when Welsh troops hit the English baggage train. Aldrich squared off with a spearman who fought like his life depended on it, because it did. The scrap lasted 30 seconds, but felt like a lifetime. The Welsh guy was fierce, fueled by homeland vibes, but Aldrich had better armor, a beefier horse, and his squad backing him up. It was a done deal, but killing up close hit hard. This wasn't a tournament flex, it was messy, raw, and personal. The Welshman went down swinging maybe someone's dad or kid, just doing his job against invaders. Aldrich's job was to end him for the crown. No ballads, just blood and a nagging what the hell feeling. Winter campaigning was the real gut punch. War in snowy Wales was less grand strategy and more don't freeze, starve, or sneeze yourself to death. Rain, mud, and mountains made supplies a nightmare, and disease was deadlier than any Welsh arrow. Aldrich learned more about endurance than glory, keeping his men alive through a campaign that felt like Mother Nature's middle finger. Sir Aldrich's crew spent weeks babysitting remote Welsh valleys, supposedly pacified, but sassier than a cat in a bath. The locals were pros at subtle rebellion food, vanished like it had legs guides sent you on wild goose chases. And tips about Welsh fighters were about as reliable as a medieval weather app. The mental toll was brutal. Knights raised on good guy versus bad guy vibes were stuck in a spy thriller where every farmer might be a double agent and every hello could hide a dagger. Aldrich slept with his sword closer than a teddy bear, rolled with a posse to avoid getting jumped and side-eyed, even the sweetest old granny offering ale. The siege of Critcheth Castle was a crash course in War Geek 101. This pint-sized fortress hogged a key coastal road the English needed to lock down Wales. Taking it meant dusting off centuries of siege know-how. Aldrich got roped into overseeing siege engine construction, a job that screamed, "You should have paid attention in math class." Trebuchets and mangonels were like medieval IKEA kits. Screw up one bolt, and your castle-smashing dreams go poof. Carpenters, engineers, math nerds, and blacksmiths teamed up to make these beasts hurl rocks with pinpoint sass. The assault itself was over faster than a TikTok trend. Weeks of bombardment turned the walls into Swiss cheese, and the tiny garrison couldn't cover every gap. Aldrich led his men up scaling ladders, dodging arrows like it was a deadly dodgeball game. When he hit the battlement sword in hand, he had a 10-minute glow-up as the knight of his childhood dreams armor gleaming, men roaring odds laughed off. It was pure Hollywood, until the castle fell and he was back to adulting. Prisoners needed sorting ransom, or no ransom, wounded needed band-aids or prayers, and loot needed cataloging. Less hero stuff, more middle management with bloodstains. Llywelyn ap Gruffudd's death in December 1282 was the knockout punch for Welsh independence, though rebels kept swinging for months. Aldrich was at the Builth Wells skirmish where Llywelyn got iced, but by the time he showed up it was mop-up mode, and the prince's head was already en route to London's Tower for some grim PR. Victory didn't mean happily ever after. Wales needed ruling, and Edward's plan was a castle-building spree with English garrisons and paperwork to make it stick. Aldrich scored a gig commanding Harlech Castle's garrison a pat on the back for his campaign hustle, but also a one-way ticket to frontier life in grumpy Wales. Harlech was still a construction zone when he rolled in its massive walls, rising like England's middle finger to Welsh dreams. Designed by Master James of St. George, a siege guru who'd learned his craft in Crusader Sandbox, it was a fortress built to scream, "Try me." Running a half-built castle while taming the locals was like juggling flaming torches on a unicycle. The Welsh were sulky but not stabby, so Aldrich had to stay woke without poking the bear too hard. His crew, 40 men-at-arms, plus 80 crossbowmen and grunts, could hold the castle but not patrol the countryside like a medieval SWAT team. Too chill and rebels got bold, too aggro and you'd spark a riot. Aldrich wasn't just a war boss, he was England's HR rep in a land that didn't want one. He settled squabbles between Welsh farmers and English settlers, collected taxes from folks who saw him as a home invader, and enforced laws that clashed with Welsh traditions like oil and water. Isolation was the real gut punch. Harlech was weeks from anything resembling a pub, and messengers risked storms, rocks, or rogue patriots to deliver mail. Winter locked the garrison in for weeks, turning the castle into a stone igloo where Aldrich had way too much time to ponder knighthood's hype versus reality. He was defending civilization, upholding the crown-bringing law, or so the king's memos said. The Welsh. They saw him as a jerk shoving English rules down their throats, Both sides had a point which made Aldrich's job messier than a tavern brawl. By his 23rd birthday, Aldrich was a seasoned pro schooled in Siege's frontier life and herding hostile locals. He'd killed up close-made calls that shaped lives and wrestled dilemmas with no easy fix. Real war, he learned, wasn't tournament flexing or bardic fanfic. It was logistics, blueprints, and paperwork with quick bursts of blood to spice things up. The kid who dreamed of epic quests was now a guy who knew glory was rare. Battles sucked, and quests often meant shaking down farmers for taxes. It wasn't the knighthood of songs, but it was the one his world demanded. After 2 years at Harlech, where Sir Aldrich became an expert in tax disputes and sheep heists instead of slaying dragons, a royal messenger rocked up with news that flipped his knightly world upside down. King Edward, fresh off his Welsh victory lap and temporarily out of wars to start, decided his knights needed to stay sharp by smacking each other silly in front of cheering crowds. The tournament circuit was back, baby, with royal bling, and pomp offering knights a chance to flex settled grudges, and maybe win enough coin to avoid selling their armor to pay the bills. Aldrich's invite was both a high five and a must-do skip the tourney life, and you're stuck eating medieval ramen while you're rep tanks. Swapping frontier grit for tournament glitz wasn't just about buffing his armor to a mirror shine. Tournaments were a whole different beast from war with rules fancier than a noble's hat. Wales was about winning dirty and quick. Tournaments were about looking hot while swinging a sword to thrill the ticket buyers. War gear. Too scruffy. Aldrich needed tourney kit, chunky flashy armor built to take a beating from blunted weapons, while screaming, "I'm fabulous." His helmet alone cost more than a peasant's lifetime hustle, a custom-fit masterpiece that hugged his noggin like a lover, tough enough to shrug off blows that had flattened lesser lids with a visor that balanced I can see and my face won't get caved in. His tourney sword was a beefy diva heavier than a warblade, balanced for jousting in tight spaces, with dulled edges to avoid accidental skewering, though it could still crack ribs or end your career if you blinked. The cash drain was brutal entry fees, travel lodging, and gear upkeep could bankrupt a knight faster than a bad dice game. Aldrich teamed up with 2 other cash-strapped knights, Sir Geoffrey de Clare, a Scottish campaign vet with Gloucestershire roots, and Sir William de Montfort, big-name empty wallet. They formed a medieval startup pooling coin for trainers, splitting gear costs, and divvying up prizes like a knightly co-op. Training was a flashback to Squire days, but on steroids. Tournaments demanded you swing weapons and survive wearing 60 pounds of steel while riding an armored horse that probably hated you. Drills targeted joust-specific muscles and reflexes like a CrossFit class from hell. Daily mock fights with blunted weapons taught Aldrich to dial in just enough aggro to score points and hype the crowd without sending anyone to the morgue. One wrong swing, and you're nursing a bruise the size of Wales. Aldrich's first tournament was at Smithfield outside London, a springtime bash that drew knights from England and beyond. It was part Olympics, part flea market, part noble prom. The lists were a medieval Marvel pop-up wooden arenas with barriers to keep knights from pancaking spectators or judges. Stands held thousands from fancy lords in VIP boxes to peasants paying to yell at their faves. The pageantry was royal court level extra. Heralds hyped each knight's name, lineage, and flexes like medieval hype men, while banners flashed family logos that screamed, "My ancestors were cooler than yours," to crowds who read heraldry like sports jerseys. Aldrich's first joust was against Sir Hugh de Brabazon, a tourney OG who'd been at it for 30 years without ever being too flashy. It was a masterclass in, "You're not ready, kid." Hugh's gear was pristine, his moves textbook, his strategy safe but slick. The clash lasted 5 seconds, flag dropped, lances flew. Aldrich's hit Hugh's shield at a wonky angle, fizzling out, while Hugh's lance slammed Aldrich's chest like a freight train, nearly yeeting him off his horse. Judges gave Hugh the W, and Aldrich got a crash course in eating humble pie. The melee was a different vibe, 20 knights in a chaotic mosh pit that felt more like war than jousting. Winning meant teaming up on the fly, spotting openings, and not getting suckered by rules that were more like suggestions. Aldrich's Welsh campaign chops shone here. He read the battlefield like a pro linked up with natural leaders and knew when to bail or pounce. His knack for group tactics and staying cool in the chaos helped him hold his own dodging traps and making moves that kept him in the game. Tournaments were like medieval Comic-Con for knights where you'd brawl by day and network by night. Sir Aldrich got swept into the nightly social swirl, rekindling bro hugs with old pals, charming new allies, and hashing out deals over tankards of ale. He scored invites to swanky feasts, joined chats about who's feuding with whom, and wormed his way into the cliques that decided who'd climb the feudal ladder. The after-parties were Pure Flex Tournament's rich sponsors through banquets to show off their coin, while minstrels spun epic poems so vague they wouldn't ruffle any noble feathers. Dancing was the medieval Tinder letting knights twirl with noble ladies who came to eye the jousts and play the courtly love game like pros. It was all vibes, velvet, and veiled power moves. Aldrich's tourney game grew over 3 seasons, slow and steady, never hitting Lancelot-level fame. He was the knightly equivalent of a solid B-plus student, dependable, not dazzling. No one carved his name on tavern walls, but folks nodded approvingly when he rode up. Prize money and side gigs from impressed lords kept his gear shiny, his crew fed, and his name in the maybe higher pile. Success wasn't just about unhorsing dudes, it was the quality of job offers sliding into his DMs. Injuries were tourney swag you didn't want. Aldrich collected bruises, tweaks, and hairline cracks like a kid trading cards, learning when to chill and when to grit his teeth and fake it. Medieval doctors were all about slapping on a bandage and shoving you back out, not preventing your future limp. His worst oopsie was at Winchester's melee when his horse yeeted him into another knight's path. The crash knocked him out colder than a Yorkshire winter and jacked up his shoulder, needing months of don't-lift-anything rehab. It screamed, "Tournaments can end you, and get a side hustle, bro." By 26, Aldrich was a tourney circuit regular, the guy you'd bet on to place but not win. He'd cracked the social code bank connections tighter than his armor, and got a black belt in organized chaos that vibed with his war resume. Tournaments were half sport, half war rehearsal, a glitzy game where the stakes were your bones and your rep. The moves, gear, and grit were battlefield close, only the body count was lower. The circuit schooled Aldrich in shining under pressure, outsmarting rivals, and why clout was as clutch as skill. Those lessons leveled up his leadership deal-making, and every moment where looking legit was half the battle. As winter loomed and the tourney tents folded, Aldrich mused on his weird gig part, commando part, jock part, bean counter part, circus star. Winning meant sword skills, political savvy budgeting like a monk, and keeping it together while bunking in sketchy inns. Tournaments were his bread and battle prep, keeping him sharp for when the king swapped joust for fun to fight or die. Until then, he had paperwork to slog through, accounts to square, and armor to polish, because play fighting could turn pro at the drop of a gauntlet. That winter, after his 3rd tournament season, Sir Aldrich stumbled into what brainy types later dubbed the chivalric crisis, but to him it was just a Yorkshire sheep soap opera gone rogue. Sir Edmund de Thornfield accused Sir Robert de Blackmore of letting his tenant's sheep chow down on disputed land, a classic medieval beef that usually fizzled out with a bit of lawyering and some flexing. But Robert, fresh off a pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela, had chugged the holy Kool-Aid, convinced God had zapped him with a mission to be the shiniest knight ever. Common sense. Out the window, Robert's new Jesus fanboy vibe turned him into a chivalry stickler, nixing any hope of a chill settlement. He scoffed at compromise, flipped off mediators, and challenged Edmund to a holy cage match to let God sort out the sheep rights. He sent the duel invite with all the medieval pomp like a wedding RSVP with extra righteousness. Aldrich got roped in as a ref tasked with keeping it fair while squinting for God's verdict on property lines. The fight was over faster than a tavern brawl. Robert's divine pep talk didn't stand a chance against Edmund's sword skills. Within minutes, Robert was an angel leaving his widow, and kids broke his estate, drowning in pilgrimage debt, and his tenants dodging eviction by loan sharks who didn't give a hoot about knightly vibes. The fallout was messier than a pigsty. Edmund won the land, but it was trashed and worthless after the drama. Worse, Aldrich realized both knights were playing by the chivalry playbook. Robert died for his principles, trusting God to back his righteousness. Edmund fought clean, won fair, and didn't cheat. Yet everyone got screwed. It was like chivalry itself had tripped over its own cape, leaving Aldrich scratching his head about what honor even meant since his Welsh days. Chivalry's rulebook: defend the innocent, protect the weak, serve God, and King Stay classy sounded dope in church or court. It fueled epic poems and gave knights a moral glow while they hacked folks for politics. But real life. It was a hot mess. Figuring out who's innocent when everyone's got a legit gripe. Good luck. Protecting the weak got tricky when peasants and noble widows were both crying for help. Serving God and King. Try tap dancing through that when the king's vibe clashed with the Bible. Aldrich's crash course in chivalry's fine print came when he was tapped to settle a spat between the Abbess of Rievaulx and Sir Thomas de Whitby over River Rye fishing rights. The abbess waived ancient monk privileges older than dirt, while Thomas insisted he needed the fish to fund his knightly duties to the king. Both leaned hard into chivalry she preached, protect the church he flexed, serve the crown. Both had solid points, zero chill, and no way to coexist. Aldrich's fix was a diplomatic dumpster. Firefish went to the abbey during Lent for monk munchies, and to Thomas the rest of the year for war prep. Everyone hated it, but it beat a courtroom slugfest that had only fattened lawyers' purses. Lesson-learned chivalry often meant picking the least bad option, not the most heroic one. Things got spicier when Aldrich was dragged into the drama of Lady Margaret de Beaumont's betrothal to Sir Geoffrey de Lacy, a match rigged for politics and coin. Problem Margaret was crushing hard on Sir Philip de Vere, a charming broke boy with more charisma than cash. She batted her lashes at Aldrich, begging him to play knight in shining armor and save her from an unwanted marriage, quoting every damsel in distress tale in the book. Geoffrey, meanwhile, gave Aldrich the bro "don't mess this up" speech, warning that ditching marriage contracts would torch the feudal glue holding society together. Aldrich was stuck between a rom-com and a legal thriller, with chivalry pulling him both ways. Things got messier when Sir Philip de Vere, the dreamy but broke knight lady, Margaret was swooning over challenged Sir Geoffrey de Lacy to a duel for her hand. It was romantic as a troubadour's ballad, but dumber than a sack of hammers. Philip was decent with a sword, but green, while Geoffrey was a tournament tank who'd been yeeting opponents for years. Aldrich was stuck in a chivalric pickle: protect Margaret's honor or keep the feudal peace. Stop bloodshed or let knights settle it like men. Root for true love or facepalm at political reality. Aldrich's fix was peak: nobody's happy but nobody's dead. He hooked Philip up with a gig fighting Scots on the border where he could win clout and maybe some cash. Margaret was sweet-talked into marrying Geoffrey with promises he'd be a gentleman, not a jerk. Geoffrey agreed to push the wedding back 6 months, giving everyone time to chill. It was like medieval HR diffusing a workplace romance gone nuclear. Margaret and Geoffrey tied the knot and grew into a "we're cool" marriage. Philip sladed in Scotland, snagged a rich wife who vibed with his hustle, and everyone avoided a bloodbath. Chivalry's ideals. More like guidelines. Aldrich learned chivalry was a shiny goal, not a rulebook. Sticking to it like glue could backfire harder than a misfired trebuchet. You needed smarts to know when to go full knight in shining armor and when to broker a deal that kept the peace. This hit home when he joined a royal probe into Sir Walter de Montpellier, Lincolnshire sheriff, who was accused of being shadier than a back-alley dice game. Walter allegedly took bribes, rigged court cases, and ran his office like a medieval mob boss, squeezing the poor to fund his bling. The dirt on Walter was juicy but shaky. His lifestyle screamed, "I'm too rich for this job." His rulings favored his sugar daddies, and his law enforcement lined his pockets. His defense pure knightly flex, he was a war hero, a charmer with ladies, a church donor and the king's BFF. Aldrich had to wrestle with the fact that Walter was a chivalric poster boy who still screwed over the little guy. Voting to convict meant admitting chivalry didn't guarantee goodness. Walter was polite while plundering legal, while looting, and knightly while knifing justice in the back. The code cared more about how you treated nobles than peasants. This gut punch was doubled when Aldrich saw how Sir Hugh de Mortimer handled prisoners from a Scottish border raid. The captured knights got the red carpet treatment comfy digs their gear and fair ransom deals. The common soldiers packed into a dank hole fed scraps and sold like livestock. Some died from neglect, but nobody batted an eye. Chivalry was, for equals, not grunts. Aldrich's complaints got blank stares from his knight bros who shrugged that peasants weren't part of the honor club. The code covered noble ladies and church VIPs, not randos in the mud. Aldrich clocked that chivalry was less a moral compass and more a social contract for the elite keeping knights tight while lording over everyone else. It was freeing he could game the system smarter, but also a bummer, knowing his job's noble hype was a members-only deal. This hit hard during a peasant revolt in the Yorkshire Dales sparked by taxes to fund Edward's war fetish, but snowballing into a screw feudalism riot. Chivalry said, crush the rebels, guard the law, and keep the system humming. But Aldrich's heart twinged he saw the peasants' point they were crushed by a rigged game. He ran the crackdown like a pro, but kept it chill. No slaughter, just justice. He spared innocents, shielded non-fighters, and doled out fair punishments. Some knights grumbled he was too soft, risking more riots. Others high-fived his restraint as true chivalry. It showed him chivalry was a Rorschach test, heroic or harsh, depending on your angle. By 28, Aldrich had swapped his starry-eyed chivalry crush for a grown-up take. The code's values were legit but limited, noble but messy. He'd flex its virtues when he could, but knew blind loyalty to ideals could tank their spirit. The ballads spun chivalry as a fairy tale, but real life was a grind of trade-offs, foggy facts, and no-win choices. Aldrich's savvy would carry him forward navigating the gap between knightly dreams and gritty reality where his knack for moral juggling would shape his fate and his people's lives. One dreary morning, Sir Aldrich's world got rocked not by epic battles or charging steeds, but by his steward, Master Thomas, looming in the solar doorway with a ledger and the face of a man who'd just learned numbers could stab harder than swords. With the tact of a diplomat breaking bad news, Thomas explained that Aldrich's estate was in what we'd call a cash flow nightmare, but medieval folks just called broke as a peasant's plow. The harvest accounts were a horror show, and Aldrich's knightly swagger wasn't paying the bills. This wasn't just Aldrich's mess. Knights everywhere were getting schooled by England's economic glow-up. Feudal vibes, where you swapped swords swinging for land, were fading. Cash was king, farming was the new flex, and knights who didn't pivot were doomed to sip watery ale in fancy armor. Aldrich's estate, 800 acres of fields, 200 of woods, grazing rights, a creaky watermill, and a manor house looked solid on parchment. In reality, it was a money pit that needed a CEO, not a swordslinger. The big oof was Aldrich's debt. That loan from York's Jewish moneylenders taken to fund his Welsh war cosplay had snowballed with interest rates that made sharks look cuddly. What started as I got this was now eating his income like a dragon at a buffet. Medieval loans were built to enrich lenders, leaving borrowers like Aldrich praying for a miracle that never came. Worse, his estate was a hot mess, 3 years of me harvests, a cow plague that halved his herd, and a wool market crash that turned his cash cow into a sad sheep. Master Thomas, the MVP of bad news, had a plan so unknightly it hurt. The estate needed to go full capitalist think profit margins, not feudal flexing. Aldrich raised to joust and Judge had to dive into the nitty-gritty of farming like a peasant with a pitchfork. Thomas kicked off a comprehensive audit, which Aldrich secretly called, "How many ways can I suck at stuff I never learned?" Every inch of the estate got poked, prodded, and judged like a livestock show. The fields, a disaster. Aldrich was growing wheat on barley-friendly dirt, wasting pastures on grass when crops would have paid better, and ignoring drainage fixes that could have juiced yields. His crop rotation was stuck in the dark ages, outclassed by newfangled systems from hip landlords. Livestock. His cows were bougie, but pricey to feed. His sheep's wool was top-notch, but too sparse to compete, and his horses were glorious money pits munching oats for no return. The staff audit was the real gut punch. Aldrich's manor was overstaffed with servants he couldn't afford a garrison bigger than a bandit scare needed, and wages so generous they screamed, "I'm a nice lord," but bankrupted him. His household ran on status not sense, with overlapping jobs and chaos that bled coin. Thomas's fix was brutal farm, like a merchant breed, for bucks not bragging rights and streamline the staff like a medieval layoff. Worst of all, Aldrich had to get his hands dirty, literally learning market trends, livestock stats, and math that made his head spin. Thomas called it practical observation, but it was basically Aldrich apprenticing as Farmer Joe. He trailed his workers like a lost puppy learning which habits bled coin and which saved it. Weeks of slogging through mud and manure gave him a crash course in running an estate that didn't run him into the ground, turning him from a nightly dreamer into a begrudging bean counter with a sword. Sir Aldrich discovered that growing grain was like herding cats with a PhD seed choice planting vibes, and harvest timing all hinged on a zillion tiny details. Soil prep was a science mixing drainage hacks, fertilizer know-how, and old-school tillage tricks passed down like family recipes. Weather wasn't just small talk. It dictated planting dates, harvest plans, and how to keep crops from turning into medieval mush. Livestock was a whole other beast. Breeding wasn't just let's make baby cows. It needed geek-level knowledge of genetics, nutrition, and plague-proofing that made warhorse pampering look like child's play. Sheep farming meant mastering wool grades, market timing, and seasonal cash flow swings. Cattle demanded pasture wizardry, feed budgeting, and cold-hearted math on when to sell Bessie before she ate your profits. The admin side was Aldrich's personal hell. Medieval bookkeeping was like decoding alien hieroglyphs. Every deal, debt, and dime had to be scribbled down in systems that juggled legal musts with don't-lose-track practicality. Keeping the estate's books meant eyeballing income versus pipe dreams and slashing expenses before they slashed him. The mill was a mini MBA in medieval hustling. Farmers paid to grind grain with chunks of their haul, creating a barter mess that needed ninja-level records to avoid fistfights. The mill's gears needed constant TLC balancing repair bills against keep-it-spinning vibes. Weather messed with water flow and demand, turning financial planning into a seasonal roller coaster. Aldrich's first big boss move was flipping a chunk of grain fields into sheep pasture, chasing steady wool demand from Flemish fabric moguls despite market hiccups. It meant sinking cash into fences, drainage, and fancy sheep, but Master Thomas's spreadsheets swore it'd pay off long term. Easier said than done, switching crops meant sweet-talking tenants who lived off farm jobs, roping in neighbors for sheep wrangling teamwork, and juggling the logistics of buying sheep that wouldn't flop in Yorkshire's soggy fields. The social fallout was spicy. Aldrich's dive into farm life raised nightly eyebrows. Some peers sniffed that he was slumming it, while others gave props for not drowning in debt. Peasants side-eyed his changes, worried their ancient rights were toast, but warmed up when they saw coin flowing. Legal headaches were relentless. Medieval property law was a tangle of who owns what rules, built for feudal flexing, not Aldrich's capitalist dreams. Every tweak needed lawyers who spoke both old-school law and new-school commerce. Results trickled in over seasons. The estate's income spiked, though not every bet paid off instantly. Some moves were home runs, others needed years to shine. Aldrich chipped away at his debt, freeing up cash for more upgrades. More than that, he realized knighthood wasn't just swinging swords and looking noble, it demanded bean-counting chops no bard ever sang about. Farming life taught him patience, zooming out from tourney adrenaline to a years-long grind, where success was steady gains, not flashy wins. His tenant vibe shifted too. Once a lofty rent collector, Aldrich became the guy who got their gripes about rain and markets boosting teamwork, but piling on new fix this demands. When marriage talks rolled around at 30, Aldrich played it like a CFO. His fatter wallet made him a hot prospect, and his farm savvy helped him vet brides for business smarts, not just blue blood. Lady Eleanor de Ashby was a power match. Her dowry lands meshed with her household know-how turbocharged Thomas's reforms, and her family's trade connections opened doors for selling wool and grain. Their wedding was a flex of Aldrich's new groove, time to flaunt the estate's bounty while keeping it classy. The guest list was a networking jackpot mixing family ties with trade buddies. By 31, Aldrich had flipped his estate from feudal flop to profit machine ditching, knightly snobbery while keeping his war-ready cred. He was warrior pencil pusher and deal-maker bending old-school chivalry to fit a cash-driven world. This hustle sharpened his political game, where money was the new loyalty, and his logistics know-how saved campaigns from starvation. As a magistrate, his admin skills untangled legal knots with real-world sense. Above all, Aldrich learned knighthood needed flex as much as guts. The medieval world was evolving, and knights who didn't level up were left polishing rusty armor. The future was for those mixing old virtues with new tricks ruling the roost, while riding the wave of change. Aldrich was still attorney jock and war-ready, but his farm boss era added layers that'd shape his next big quests. Sir Aldrich's me-time was rarer than a sunny Yorkshire day, squeezed between running his estate playing war hero and juggling noble schmoozing. That first winter after marrying Lady Eleanor, when short days and frozen fields hit pause on farm life, he got a taste of quiet that felt weirder than a joust without lances. Lady Eleanor turned Ravenshollow's great hall from a stuffy office dining room into something suspiciously homey. New tapestries and fancy chairs screamed we're not broke anymore, but it was the cozy nooks for chats, reading, or just chilling that made it feel like a real house, not a medieval Airbnb for knights. Eleanor herself was a plot twist Aldrich didn't see coming. He'd married her for her estate-managing cred and VIP family ties, expecting a solid business partner. Instead, he got a whip-smart wife with a snarky streak and hot takes on everything from crop yields to French politics. Their early talks were stiff, like two diplomats at a peace summit sticking to the medieval spouse script after 3 pre-wedding meet-cuties. But co-running the estate cracked the ice, and Aldrich found himself geeking out over debates with someone who saw the world differently but meshed with his vibe. Eleanor ran the household like a Navy SEAL, making Master Thomas's farm fixes look like amateur hour. She streamlined the staff-tracked expenses down to the last candle stub and hacked food storage to cut waste, turning the manor into a lean, mean mutton-serving machine. For Aldrich, the real win was Eleanor carving out private hideouts in a house built for showboating and sieges. The Solar became a no-servants-allowed chill zone for real talk, and her private chamber had a desk where Aldrich could scribble letters without a peasant begging for sheep rights. She even stocked a mini-library pricey manuscripts of history philosophy, and stories that were more ooh culture than his old war logs and legal scrolls. These books were medieval flexes, proof you had coin and class, but also brain candy for long winter nights. Reading together was their new jam, though. It was like learning to joust with a quill. Medieval reading was for contracts, not cozying up with Plato. Aldrich wrestled with philosophy like it was a Scottish raider, while Eleanor mined history for estate-managing hacks. Summer nights left them an hour before bed, to debrief by the Solar's fading fire, but winter was prime couple time, despite the castle's icebox chic vibe. They sipped hot wine, played chess by candlelight, and grooved to minstrels who doubled as medieval news anchors. Winter's isolation was a convo goldmine, free from the usual parade of whiny tenants and pushy nobles. Aldrich spilled his guts about stuff he'd never shared, and Eleanor's questions made him see his own story page tonight in a new light like a bard remixing his epic. The manor's practical quirks were a nightly humbling. Keeping rooms from freezing meant babysitting fires all night. Candles were a fire hazard tightrope, and making homework meant sinking with the estate's grind. Aldrich found weird pride in domestic wins like keeping the solar toasty or whipping up stew when the cooks were AWOL. He even patched his own gear, a far cry from his Call the Squire days. Eleanor's pets, a palfrey and 2 hunting hounds, shook things up. The dogs, needy as toddlers, added feeding and walkies to the to-do list, but brought a goofy joy to the manor's hustle. They tagged along on Aldrich's evening strolls, his go-to for untangling knotty problems. Wandering the estate let him eyeball crops, check cows, and stay fight-ready without tourney pressure, all while the hounds sniffed every bush like medieval detectives. These quiet moments reshaped Aldrich's view of his knightly saga. He'd built a tale of grit and glory, but Eleanor's lens showed how the grind had forged his soul, not just his sword arm. Domestic life wasn't just a side quest, it was a new battlefield, where small victories and shared laughs mattered as much as any joust. Sir Aldrich's evening strolls with his hounds turned into brain-clearing marathons way better than stewing over ledgers. Pacing the estate, sucking in crisp air, and dodging dog slobber helped him untangle knotty problems faster than desk jockeying ever could. The combo of legwork solitude and not tripping over sheep sparked the kind of big-picture thinking his jam-packed nightly life demanded. Being medieval VIPs meant juggling public flex with private chill. Nobles had to keep a manor that screamed, "We're loaded," while throwing parties to glue alliances tighter than chainmail. Aldrich and Lady Eleanor nailed this high-wire act, hosting shindigs that were half feast, half TED Talk. Eleanor's hostess game was Michelin star pairing killer grub with brainy banter that lured guests who wanted more than just free mead. Aldrich's rep as a thoughtful boss man meshed with her charm, turning their soirees into power moves that were actually fun. Running these bashes was like herding cats in armor. You needed to decode who outranked whom, who was beefing, and who'd sulk if seated by the drafty window, way trickier than jousting etiquette. Aldrich leveled up his people skills, which made him a sharper leader and a better buddy. Seasonal festivals, Christmas, Easter, saintly shindigs were community glue and stress relief valves. At first, Aldrich saw them as chores, but he grew to love their vibe for rallying the troops. Planning them meant nailing local traditions, wrangling logistics, and schmoozing tenants like a medieval hype man. The real private stuff happened in daily rituals that kept Aldrich and Eleanor tight when life wasn't throwing curveballs. Morning munchies were for syncing schedules and sneaking in some how's your day going chats. Nighttime wind-downs by the fire were for spilling guts about worries or schemes that needed no eavesdroppers. These routines were the glue for a life where a king's summons or crop-killing frost could yeet your plans into chaos. Having a rhythm kept them grounded like a medieval couples therapy app. Letters to kin and pals tied them to the world beyond Yorkshire's mud. Medieval mail was slower than a drunk ox, so each letter was gold gossip trade tips, or the King's Madigan updates that shaped their moves. Writing together was like co-authoring a diplomatic novel, dodging social landmines, and praying the messenger didn't get lost or mugged. They had to nail tone intent, and who'd read it aloud to a nosy court turning scribbles into a high-stakes word game. Sickness and old injuries were grim reminders that medieval life was one bad cough from game over. Aldrich's tourney scars flared up, turning him into a grumpy statue, while Eleanor battled mystery ailments that medieval docs could name but not fix. These rough patches were bonding boot camps, swapping roles as nurse and cheerleader, tweaking plans when one was down and staying chipper, despite you might die vibes. It built a partnership tougher than castle walls. Money woes, from Aldrich's broke night days, morphed into grown-up debates about growth versus safety. With the estate finally in the black, they wrestled over investing in new fields or hoarding coin for rainy days. Eleanor's clan leaned play it safe, while Aldrich was all about calculated gambles for big wins. Hammering out a plan meant blending their styles into a unified, Let's not screw this up strategy like medieval marriage counseling with spreadsheets. By 34, Aldrich realized private life wasn't just a hideout from nightly grind, it was his secret weapon. His vibe with Eleanor powered his public hustle, giving him the mojo to tackle lordly duties with a grin. The kid who'd left home with a sack of dreams was now a guy whose home life was as epic as his battlefield cred, with a wife who made him better and a manor that felt like more than a fancy barracks. Domestic wins weren't just fluff, they were the foundation for leading his people with heart and hustle. Sir Aldrich's body started cashing in its IOUs for 3 decades of nightly mayhem. One gloomy autumn morning, when he tried to hop onto his destrier Thunder for a routine estate patrol. His left knee, grumpy since a tourney tumble last summer, screamed "nope" with a pain so sharp he yelped like a kicked pup. His stable boy played it cool, inching closer in case his lord needed a sneaky boost, but Aldrich, red-faced, hauled himself up on try two. That wince-worthy moment kicked off his crash course in "Your body hates you now, courtesy of medieval medicine's just pray it gets better approach." The scrapes and bangs he'd shrugged off as a young buck began demanding overdue payments. His shoulder yeeted out of socket back in Squire days, now whined like a cranky weatherman predicting rain with every twinge. Cracked ribs from tourney mishaps had knitted wonky turning twists into a stiff, ouchy ordeal. Worst of all, his ninja reflexes once his tourney trump card were slowing. In sparring, greenhorn soldiers with sloppy form started landing hits. His younger self would have danced around blindfolded. Those split-second lags were the difference between champ and chump in a game where timing was everything. The mental gymnastics of aging were tougher than the aches. Aldrich had built his life on being the guy who could outfight anyone, and now his body was ghosting him like a bad Tinder date. He brushed off each creak as a fluke, dodging the truth that he was past his prime. Lady Eleanor, sharp as ever, clocked his stair-rail death grip before he did. Dropping a gentle maybe, try a walking stick framed, as it's just for dark trails, babe. Her tact screamed, "I've been watching you limp for months." When Aldrich caved, the ashwood stick with its iron tip was a game-changer, steady footing, less tripping, but also a neon sign saying, "I'm not what I was." It shifted him from struts like a boss to needs a prop, a gut punch to his knightly ego. Tournaments, his cash cow and social hub for a decade, became a no-go. His last hurrah was at Chester in his 36th summer, where a joust fall knocked him out cold for minutes. Master Hugh York's top physician broke the news like he was defusing a bomb. Aldrich's brain had taken too many hits. One more concussion could mean drooling in a corner, or worse, keep jousting. Say hello to the Grim Reaper. Aldrich spun his retirement as a wise choice to focus on big-picture stuff. But truth was, his tourney days ended not with a blaze of glory, but a sad "I can't anymore." His prize trophies in Ravenshollow's hall were relics of a sprier Aldrich. Losing the circuit's networking goldmine gossip deals, clout meant finding new ways to stay in the game. He pivoted to wise old knight mode, judging tourneys with his battle-honed fairness. It kept him in the loop without risking his skull, turning him from player to ref. With less saddle-time estate paperwork took over like an invasive weed. Funny thing, his creaky joints made him a better boss. He leaned into delegating building systems that ran smoother than his old knees, cutting his grunt work while boosting profits. Training young bucks became his new jam, especially his nephew Edmund, a 16-year-old wannabe knight. Coaching Edmund forced Aldrich to unpack his "do it, 'cause I said so" instincts into actual lessons, passing the torch with a side of "don't repeat my dumb mistakes." Aldrich's body might have been waving a white flag, but his brain and heart were still in the fight, reshaping his knightly vibe into something wiser, if wobblier. Sir Aldrich's bond with his nephew Edmund was a win-win that neither saw coming. Edmund's youthful zip let him tackle tasks Aldrich's creaky joints vetoed, while Aldrich's hard-earned wisdom steered the kid away from the dumb moves that had marked his own rookie years. Their mentor-mentee vibe became a blueprint for passing down knightly know-how, keeping traditions alive like a medieval TikTok tutorial. Evenings with Lady Eleanor shifted from what's today's crisis to what's our legacy. They dove into deep chats about death succession and ensuring the estate didn't tank when they kicked the bucket. It was like planning a party nobody wants to attend, needing new lingo for the grim stuff. With less saddle time, Aldrich nerded out on military history, going beyond how to stab to dissect ancient battles and recent wars for universal war hacks. He swapped letters with brainy clerks and war geeks across Europe, building a nerd network that jazzed up his battlefield chops with book smarts. His letters were so sharp they screamed, "I'm not just a sword swinger anymore." At 37, Aldrich poured his heart into a DIY estate management guide, bottling his and Eleanor's farm fixes for future lords. It wasn't just a how-to, it was a love letter to lordship weighing power, versus duty personal wins, versus community good, and the feudal web holding it all together. His climb from page to boss gave him a 360 view most knights missed, making the manual a medieval management classic. Chronic pain became Aldrich's clingy sidekick, and medieval cures were about as useful as a wooden shield in a firestorm. He coped with ninja-level posture tweaks, light workouts, and mental grit to keep aches from running the show. It was like bargaining with his body. "I'll go easy if you don't ruin my day." His chats with Father Benedict, the castle's spiritual GPS, got real as Aldrich wrestled with, "What's it all mean? And will God roast me for that Welsh guy I skewered?" Reconciling his gritty knight life with heavenly checklists meant owning the messy gray between saint and sinner. Winter at 38 brought a cough that hung on like a bad house guest, and a minor injury that demanded more TLC than a diva's palfrey. These health hiccups screamed, "You're not 20 anymore," and made Aldrich see his shrinking wiggle room wasn't just his problem. It could tank the estate if he keeled over. He and Eleanor hashed out, what if I croaked plans, building systems to keep Ravenshollow humming, no matter who was in charge. Aldrich leaned into team estate vibes, making sure the place didn't need his personal sparkle to shine. The bittersweet kicker was watching his night bros age out too, swapping tourney trash talk for remember when we could walk without groaning. Their bond deepened less about flexing, and more about surviving life's gauntlet together. Young hotshots ruling the lists gave Aldrich déjà vu. Their cocky energy was his old self, but their wins reminded him how far he'd come. He grinned, knowing they'd face the same grind he'd conquered. By 38, Aldrich had morphed from sword-swinging star to sage coach, guiding others more than stealing the spotlight. He wasn't done still fit enough for light duty, but his core gig was now wisdom, not warfare. The kid who'd chased knightly glory now saw real wins, were quiet, lifting others up, knowing what to fight and what to let go. His armor hung polished in his room, less a suit-up call and more a shiny nod to a life well fought. In the spring of his 39th year, a letter from the Royal Chancery dropped a bombshell bigger than a trebuchet's payload. King Edward Longshanks, the warlord who'd shaped Aldrich's sword-swinging youth and paperwork-heavy adulthood, had croaked while plotting another Scottish smackdown. A king's death always rattled the nobles, but Edward's exit was like closing a Netflix series that had run Aldrich's whole life. His son, Edward II, wasn't exactly filling Dad's boots, lacking the old man's battle cred or political swagger. He was already sparking uh-oh vibes among the savvy. The funeral march from Scotland to Westminster Abbey was Aldrich's last hurrah in the royal pomp game. The slow, somber trek screamed the crown lives on, while whispering even badasses bite the dust. Aldrich rode with the Yorkshire crew, but his spot in the lineup was more guest star than leading man. A nod to his shift from action hero to wise old cameo. The ride gave him time to chew on Edward's epic 35-year reign and side-eye what Edward II's sequel might flop into. Back at Ravenshollow, Aldrich entered what he called his accounting years, swapping glory chasing for tying up loose ends. His estate management manual, started during last winter's couch potato phase, became his brain's new jousting field. Writing it meant dusting off old choices, some genius, some what was I thinking, and seeing how they'd aged like cheap mead. The manual grew from a how-to into a deep dive on leadership duty and balancing me versus we. Aldrich wasn't just writing for future Ravenshollow bosses, but for anyone stuck herding people through tough calls. His scribbles sparked fan mail from lords across England and Europe, creating a medieval think tank where everyone swapped how do we not screw this up tips. Aldrich's pen pals were wrestling the same old ways, Fierosens. New world puzzle making him feel less like the only knight googling how to feudalism. Grooming Edmund, his nephew, was Aldrich's proudest side quest. Their training plan was sharper than Aldrich's own slapdash education, mixing his hard-won hacks with Edmund's knack for not repeating Uncle's face plants. As Edmund leveled up from eager teen to estate-running pro, their vibe shifted from listen-up kid to what's your take, partner. Aldrich handed off big tasks, steering just enough to keep Edmund from yeeting into rookie traps. Teaching Edmund meant turning Aldrich's gut instinct skills, battle plans, deal-making, budgeting, HR into a syllabus a newbie could grook. It was like explaining how to ride a destrier to someone who'd never seen a horse. At 40, Aldrich launched a village school, a legacy flex that screamed, readings not just for monks. Funded by estate cash and staffed by a Yorkminster nerd, it taught kids the 3 R's to boost their hustle and the estate's paperwork game. Some knights fretted literate peasants would get uppity. Others high-fived Aldrich's get with the times vibe. He just saw it as a no-brainer. Smarter tenants meant fatter profits and fewer... I forgot my rent excuses. The chapel glow-up at 41 was Aldrich's fancy-up God's House project. Ravenshollow's old prayer shack was fine for basic hallelujahs, but lacked the swank a cash-flush estate deserved. The Reno was a full-on facelift, sturdier walls, snazzier decor, and holy art for future pew-sitters. It wasn't just spiritual bling. It was Aldrich's way of saying, we're here for the long haul, leaving a mark as lasting as his manual or Edmund's rise. Picking artists for Ravenshollow's Chapel Reno was like curating a medieval Etsy. Sir Aldrich had to juggle. Is it holy enough with will it bankrupt us? His choices screamed, thanks God for the wins, without flexing too hard for a guy whose CV was built on swordplay. The tomb effigy he commissioned was peak legacy planning, because medieval VIPs liked to DIY their grave selfies. Carved in full armor hands, praying with symbols of his lordly gigs at the base, it shouted, I served, I stewarded. I'm chill with Jesus instead of I conquered all. It was classy, not flashy like Aldrich saying, I'm just a knight, not a rock star. Sorting out the estate's future cash flow was a legal labyrinth that made jousting look like a nap. Medieval inheritance rules were a mess of feudal church, and, because we've always done it, vibes that could leave heirs or creditors in a ditch. Aldrich's fix was a paperwork blitz, multiple docs to cover succession angles, keeping Eleanor comfy for life, handing Edmund a debt-free estate, and shielding tenants from chaos. It was like writing a will that moonlit as a peace treaty. Sifting through his life's loot swords, armor tourney swag letters, books was like a medieval Marie Kondo session. Some stuff went to heirs for practical use, some got saved for awe memories, and some fulfilled promises to pals or priests. Aldrich realized most of his hoard was just stuff, but a few bits like a worn prayer book or Eleanor's first letter were pure gold. His oral history project with a wandering scholar at 42 was a bid to trap his generation's tea before it faded. Spilling his life story plus England's glow-up gave future nerds the raw scoop on medieval drama. The scholar's questions made Aldrich see his saga as part of a bigger plot, turning I did this into we lived through that. Health hiccups piled up, forcing Aldrich to lean on his crew for stuff he used to solo. His staff were ninjas at helping without bruising his ego, making it feel like teamwork, not old guy needs a hand. Evening chats with Eleanor turned into memory lane marathons, swapping tales that glued their marriage and prepped her for the widowhood Stats said was coming. Ravenshollow's seasonal grind spring seeds, fall harvests, hit different as Aldrich clocked their countdown. Each cycle was a high five to time marking his life's score. Young knights swinging by Ravenshollow were like TikTok stars to Aldrich's VHS era. Their shiny gear pro-training and gig economy vibes screamed new school, but their core headaches, juggling duty skill, and not being a jerk were Aldrich's old news. He dished advice like a medieval life coach, chill on the glory-chasing nail the basics, and build a squad for when life eats you. It was less be like me and more don't trip where I did. Realizing his action hero days were done brought Aldrich a weird peace, not a pity party. He'd crushed dreams that 7-year-old Aldrich couldn't have doodled, learned stuff no tutor could teach, and built systems to outlast him. His legacy wasn't epic statues or bardic bangers, but quiet wins. A school for kids and estate-feeding families paperwork that didn't suck, and a vibe inspiring the next gen to step up. By 42, Aldrich was vibing with a chill joy that didn't need a crowd's applause. The kid who'd craved nightly bling now knew the real MVPs were the unsung grinds, lifting others, leaving a mark, and laughing at life's curveballs. Success wasn't about stacking gold, but sowing good for the long haul. In the autumn of his 43rd year, Sir Aldrich caught a fever that seemed like just another seasonal sniffle, a pesky side effect of his tourney-battered body. But when it lingered like an uninvited guest, Master Hugh York's go-to physician rolled in with a face that screamed bad news incoming. With the tact of a guy defusing a bomb, he dropped the verdict Aldrich had a wasting disease, a slow-motion KO from a lifetime of nightly beatdowns. His strength would fade, but his brain would stay sharp. Medieval medicine could toss him some pillows and prayers, but a cure, nope, that was above their pay grade. Hugh hedged with a god might pull a miracle, but the clock was ticking in seasons, not decades. Aldrich took the news like he'd faced 1,000 lances, cool collected, ready to plan his exit like a boss. Death was just another quest needing prep and swagger. His daily grind tweaked slowly like easing off a warhorse. Estate patrols shrank swapped for cart rides when his knees or the mud said, "No way." He slid from running meetings to dropping wise nuggets, letting nephew Edmund grab the reins without making it a soap opera. The handover was so slick, most of the estate crew didn't clock the shift. Aldrich kept it chill, ensuring the place hummed, while Edmund got his sea legs. His pen pal game, once a nerdy side hustle, turned into a farewell tour via parchment. Aldrich's letters to pals across England and Europe were classy goodbyes, dripping with thanks for the vibes, but steering clear of "I'm dying, woe is me." The replies flooded in a who's who of knights clerks and eggheads singing his praises. It was like getting a medieval LinkedIn endorsement spree showing Aldrich the epic web he'd spun without even trying. Lady Eleanor handled his diagnosis like a queen mixing steel nerves with heart. She didn't let tears derail the to-do list, keeping Aldrich's final act tight while prepping for her solo run. Their spiritual powwows with Father Benedict got heavy diving into, will God roast me for all the stabbing Aldrich owned? His career's moral mess saving folks sometimes meant skewering others. Benedict nudged him toward sorry God vibes, but admitted knights were stuck in ethical quicksand with no easy outs. The church needed warriors, but squirmed over Jesus' turn the other cheek memo. Aldrich's final confession was a soul-bearing sesh, wrestling with his dual life as protector and punch-thrower. He landed on, I meant well betting, that fighting for justice and the helpless was wholly enough, even if it got bloody. It wasn't a theology PhD, but it let him sleep easier. Handing the estate keys to Edmund went into overdrive as winter drained Aldrich's juice. What started as here's how to farm became a crash course in how to adult. Aldrich spilled tea on reading people juggling egos and deciding with half the facts stuff no scroll could teach. Edmund stepped up like a champ, growing from eager teen to estate-running rock star faster than a squire learning to duck. Aldrich was legit wowed, grinning at the thought of Ravenshollow thriving post him. His fading strength didn't dim his pride in setting up the kid for success, proving his life's grind wasn't just about surviving, but building something that'd outlast his creaky bones. When word of Sir Aldrich's fading health spread, Ravenshollow's villagers showed up in droves, proving he wasn't just the boss, but part of their vibe. Tenants, carpenters, and field hands sent heartfelt get-wells and thanks-man gestures way more touching than the stiff condolence scrolls from his noble pals. Their low-key love, like a kid scribbled, "You're cool." Note hit Aldrich hard proof his lord with a heartstick had landed. Spring planting in his 44th year was Aldrich's last hurrah in the dirt dance that had shaped his life. He was more mascot than farmer blessing seeds and praying for non-crappy weather, but everyone got the memo this was his final bow. Those seeds destined for someone else's harvest screamed, "Life goes on," giving Aldrich a warm fuzzy that no tourney trophy could match. His estate, his people, his upgrades, they'd keep rocking for generations, a legacy cooler than any sword-swinging saga. Summer saw his body throw in the towel bit by bit, needing help for stuff he used to ace solo. His loyal staff, who'd been with him through thick and thin, swooped in like medieval super nannies, keeping his dignity intact while sneaking in support. Their care was less job duty and more, we got you a boss pure heart over paycheck. Aldrich's big brain project was a memoir to juice up his earlier estate manual aimed at Edmund and future Ravenshollow honchos. It spilled the tea on how he made calls, sweet-talked allies, and lucked into wins that looked like genius movies. Less how to Lord textbook more I screwed up here's why it showed leadership's messy human side mistakes and all. Autumn's harvest run by Edmund was a banger proof Aldrich's plans weren't just pipe dreams. He tagged along enough to see his seeds sprout into prosperity, a high five from the fields that Edmund had it covered. That year's Harvest Fest was the community's worst-kept secret Aldrich's last party. He rationed his energy like a stingy quartermaster, but showed up to keep the Lord Tenant love alive. The speeches were all thanks you rock without the waterworks, and Aldrich's own pep talk hyped teamwork and keep the good times rolling. It was a vibe less funeral, more we got this. Winter brought the final slide with weeks, not months, on the clock. Aldrich's prep was ninja level, tying up loose ends so his exit wouldn't tank the estate. Eleanor was a rock-juggling hugs and spreadsheets, making his last days as cozy as medieval medicine read not very aloud. His final chats with Edmund were masterclasses in how to not suck at leading. They covered keeping it real, sticking to promises, tackling tough calls, and the buzz of serving something bigger than your ego stuff. You can't Google even in 1283. Aldrich's fireside musings traced his path from his dad's pokey manner to lordly legend. He grinned at wins, cringed at flubs, and realized the small stuff shaped him as much as the big moments. He slipped away one snowy February morning, snoozing peacefully with Eleanor Edmund and his ride-or-die staff around him. Father Benedict dropped the holy send-off, ensuring Aldrich's soul had its boarding pass. His funeral was classy, but not extra, just how Aldrich liked it. The chapel service hyped his service and faith, with Yorkshire's who's who packing the pews. Buried under his custom effigy, armored, praying humble yet badass. It nailed his essence with an inscription bigging up duty over dazzle. Edmund slid into the boss role smoother than a greased lance, thanks to Aldrich's OCD-level planning. The estate kept humming, tenants stayed loyal, and Aldrich's upgrades set the stage for a golden era. Eleanor's widow gig was softened by Aldrich's cash stash and her community cred. She kept the estate's brain trust alive, letting Edmund flex his style without losing her know-how. Aldrich's legacy wasn't in statues or sagas, but in quiet wins, a school teaching kids to read systems, keeping the manor mint, and right by folks' vibe that stuck. His story didn't end with a Hollywood showdown, but a chill fade out, a life well played in medieval England's sandbox. No bards would sing of Aldrich, but the folks he helped, the systems he built, and the example he set would keep his mojo alive. As snow blanketed Yorkshire's hills gearing up for another planting, Ravenshollow rolled on fields, folks in Aldrich's steady hand, ensuring the beat went on long after his curtain call.